The United States government tried to force one company to hand over the most powerful artificial intelligence system ever built. The company refused. So the government did something unprecedented. It blacklisted them. Not like a competitor, not like a partner, but like a foreign enemy. And then, just weeks later, something changed. The same government that shut them out began trying to get them back. Because the technology they rejected had become too important to ignore. This is the story of how one AI company challenged the most powerful government in the world, and what happened when that government realized it might actually need them. At the center of this story is a man named Dario Amodei. He isn't a politician. He isn't a military strategist. He's a researcher. Someone who spent years studying how artificial intelligence behaves, how it evolves, and more importantly, how it can go wrong. Before founding his own company, he worked at OpenAI, one of the leading AI labs in the world. And while most people were focused on how powerful AI could become, Amodei was preoccupied with the catastrophic edge cases, the silent moments when a system's logic diverges from human safety in ways we can't predict.
I worry a lot about the unknowns, but precisely because of that, we're trying to predict everything we can. We're thinking about the economic impacts of AI. We're thinking about the misuse. We're thinking about losing control of the model.
That question is what led him to leave. Along with a group of researchers who shared the same concerns, he started a new company, Anthropic. The goal wasn't just to build better AI. It was to build AI that could be controlled. They sought to engineer constitutional AI, systems governed by an internal set of principles that wouldn't spiral beyond human understanding or remain aligned with human intentions, even as they became more capable. At first, Anthropic looked like just another AI startup, but that didn't last long. Within a short period of time, the company began developing models that rivaled, and in some cases surpassed, what others had built. Their systems could reason more effectively, analyze complex data faster, and uncover patterns that would take humans days or weeks to find. But what really set them apart wasn't just raw performance. It was a self-imposed restraint that felt almost alien in a Silicon Valley culture defined by moving fast and breaking things. They were deliberately limiting what their systems could do, especially in areas that could be dangerous. By the end of 2025, Anthropic had become one of the most important players in the AI space. Their technology was being used by major corporations, financial institutions, and even parts of the US government. Quietly, steadily, they were becoming embedded in critical systems. And then they began working on something even more advanced, a model that would push capabilities to a level few had imagined. Internally, it was seen as a breakthrough. A system that could analyze entire digital environments, identify hidden vulnerabilities, and simulate outcomes across complex systems. It wasn't merely a chatbot answering queries anymore. It was a digital architect capable of deconstructing the very foundations of modern software to see how they functioned, and more importantly, how they could be shattered. That kind of capability changes things, because in today's world, power isn't just about physical strength. It's about information. It's about knowing where systems are weak, where they can be influenced, and how they can be controlled. And that's exactly the kind of capability the Pentagon pays attention to. In February 2026, a meeting was arranged in Washington. It wasn't public, it wasn't announced, but it would become one of the most important moments in this entire story. On one side of the table was Pete Hegseth, the man responsible for overseeing the US military. On the other side was Dario Amodei. The message from the Pentagon was clear. They wanted access to Anthropic's technology, not limited access, not partial integration, full access, the ability to use it for any lawful purpose. That phrase sounds simple, but in practice it carries a lot of weight. It means the military, not the company, decides how the system is used. It means the technology could be applied in surveillance operations. It could be used in targeting systems. It could be integrated into decision-making processes where speed matters more than caution. For the Pentagon, this wasn't unusual. When new technology emerges, they integrate it, they adapt it, they use it to maintain an advantage. But for Anthropic, this was different, because from the beginning, they had drawn clear boundaries. Two lines that they would not cross: no autonomous weapons and no mass surveillance, especially involving their own citizens. To them, these weren't just policies. They were the structural safeguards of their corporate identity. Because once systems are deployed at the scale of a superpower's military, the consequences are no longer theoretical simulations in a lab. They are real, immediate, and often irreversible. The Pentagon didn't agree. From their perspective, restrictions like that create limitations, and limitations create risk. They need flexibility. They need speed. They need the ability to act without waiting for external approval. So the conversation shifted. It was no longer about collaboration. It became about compliance.
Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth gave CEO Dario Amodei until the end of the week to sign a document ensuring the military would have full access to the company's AI model. Officials are considering invoking the Defense Production Act to force Anthropic to do what the military wants.
In that moment, the entire future of the company, and possibly much more, came down to a single decision. Amodei didn't delay. He didn't ask for more time. He didn't try to negotiate smaller concessions. He simply refused. That one decision set everything in motion. Within days, the situation escalated.
The Pentagon has designated the AI company as an official supply chain risk.
The Pentagon formally labeled AI lab Anthropic a supply chain risk.
Pete Hegseth made the conflict public. Anthropic was officially labeled a supply chain risk, a term that might not sound dramatic, but in government language, it carries serious implications. It's a designation typically reserved for foreign entities that could pose a threat to national security. Companies tied to rival nations, contractors suspected of espionage, not American firms operating within the country. But now, Anthropic had been placed in that category. Overnight, the narrative changed. They were no longer seen as a partner. They were a potential threat. The impact was immediate. Contracts were put on hold. Clients began to question their association. Internally, companies started reassessing their reliance on Anthropic's technology. Because when the US government labels something as a risk, even indirectly, people take it seriously. And then it escalated even further.
With tech startup Anthropic, the president wrote in part on Truth Social, quote, "I am directing every federal agency in the United States government to immediately cease all use of Anthropic's technology. We don't need it, we don't want it, and will not do business with them again."
With a 6-month window to completely phase it out. In a single move, Anthropic was cut off from the entire federal ecosystem. Systems that had depended on their technology had to be replaced. Teams had to find alternatives. Projects had to be restructured. It wasn't just a policy shift, it was a disruption. But behind the scenes, something didn't quite align. Because even as the public narrative painted Anthropic as a risk, internal communications suggested something very different. A senior defense official, Emil Michael, reached out privately. His message was simple. They were very close to a deal. That contradiction would later become one of the most important details in the entire case, and it wouldn't stay hidden for long. The contradiction didn't stay hidden for long, because once Anthropic took the government to court, everything changed. What had been happening behind closed doors was now being pulled into the open. Documents were filed, communications were reviewed, and the narrative that had been presented to the public began to unravel like a poorly constructed lie. Anthropic argued that the government's actions weren't about national security at all. They were about pressure, retaliation for refusing to comply. According to their claim, the blacklist wasn't a protective measure, it was a punishment. That's a serious accusation to make against the United States government. But as the case moved forward, details began to surface that made the situation even more complicated. Inside a federal courtroom in California, the case started to take shape. A federal judge reviewed the details of the case, including the timeline of events and the internal communications that had taken place. What she saw didn't align with the government's position. The public claim was that Anthropic posed a national security risk. But the private communications suggested something else entirely. At one point, the judge described the situation as Orwellian. That single word carried weight. It suggested something deeper than a simple policy disagreement. It implied that the government may have overstepped, that it had used its authority not just to regulate, but to pressure and control. The judge also pointed directly to the contradiction. On one hand, the government was labeling Anthropic as a threat. On the other, a senior official was saying they were close to a deal. Those two things don't fit together easily. And in a legal setting, that inconsistency matters. For the first time, the story began to shift in the public eye. What had initially looked like a government protecting national interests started to look like a desperate attempt to seize the reins of the most significant technological evolution in human history. While this was happening in the courtroom, another development was unfolding outside of it. Anthropic's biggest competitor was watching closely. That competitor was led by Sam Altman. And while Anthropic was locked in a legal battle with the government, OpenAI made a move that immediately changed the landscape. Within hours of the blacklist becoming public, OpenAI announced that it had reached an agreement with the Pentagon. The contrast was impossible to ignore. One company had refused to meet the government's demands. The other had agreed. One was being pushed out. The other was stepping in. From a business perspective, it made sense. The Pentagon represents one of the largest and most influential customers in the world. Securing that relationship provides not just revenue, but strategic positioning. It signals alignment, cooperation, willingness to operate within the government's framework. But from a broader perspective, it raised new questions. Was this the direction the industry was heading? Would companies that resisted government demands be pushed out, while those that complied would be rewarded? And if that pattern continued, what would it mean for the future of AI development? The public began to take notice. People started comparing the two approaches. Some viewed Anthropic's decision as principled, a rare instance of a corporation setting moral boundaries in a space where few exist. Others saw it as a reckless gamble that could leave the company isolated and obsolete. At the same time, data began to reflect a shift in perception. Users started paying more attention to alternatives. Discussions spread across online communities. The story wasn't just about a contract dispute anymore. It had become a broader conversation about ethics, control, and the role of AI in society. But just when it seemed like the narrative was settling into a clear divide, another twist emerged. Despite the blacklist, despite the public statements, and despite the legal battle, parts of the US government were still using Anthropic's technology. Not the military, but intelligence agencies. The very groups responsible for analyzing threats and protecting national security continued to rely on Anthropic's systems, quietly, without public acknowledgement. That detail changed everything because it revealed something important. The issue was never about whether Anthropic's technology was valuable. That had already been established. The issue was who controlled it. Inside the government, there was a clear divide. Some agencies saw the technology as essential. Others saw the company's refusal to fully cooperate as a problem. And that divide created a situation where the same organization could publicly reject something while privately depending on it to maintain its edge in the global intelligence race. From the outside, it looked contradictory, but from the inside, it reflected a deeper tension, a struggle between different priorities. As the legal battle continued, the pressure didn't ease. If anything, it intensified. Anthropic was still locked out of Pentagon contracts. The appeals process wasn't going in their favor. At one point, a federal appeals court ruled that the balance of interest leaned toward the government, allowing the blacklist to remain in place. So now the company was in a strange position. It had challenged the government. It had gained public support in some areas. It had exposed contradictions in the government's narrative. But it was still facing real consequences: lost deals, uncertain partnerships, and ongoing legal uncertainty. For most companies, that kind of pressure would force a compromise, a pivot toward alignment to save the bottom line. But Anthropic didn't change its position. Instead, it did something else. It kept building. And that decision would lead to the next phase of the story, one that would shift the balance of power in a way no one had fully anticipated. Because while the government was focused on controlling access, Anthropic was focused on advancing capability. And in a field like artificial intelligence, capability changes everything. By early April, the company was ready to reveal what it had been working on. It wasn't a press conference filled with bold claims. It wasn't a flashy product launch with cinematic trailers. It was something quieter, more controlled, but far more significant. Anthropic announced a new initiative, Project Glasswing. At first glance, it sounded like just another research effort, another step forward in a rapidly evolving field. But the details told a different story. At the core of Project Glasswing was a new system, an unreleased model known internally as Claude Mythos. This wasn't just a more advanced chatbot. It wasn't designed to answer questions or generate text in a better way. It was built to understand systems, entire systems, digital environments that span thousands, sometimes millions of interconnected components. Operating systems, web browsers, enterprise software, critical infrastructure. Claude Mythos could analyze these environments at scale, not just scanning for known issues, but discovering unknown ones, weaknesses that hadn't been documented, vulnerabilities that hadn't been patched, points of failure that no one had identified yet. In cybersecurity, these are known as zero-day vulnerabilities, and they are among the most valuable pieces of information in the world, because whoever finds them first has the advantage. They can fix them or exploit them. That dual nature is what makes this kind of technology so powerful and so dangerous. With Project Glasswing, Anthropic began working with major technology partners, companies responsible for building and maintaining the systems that the world depends on. These were quiet collaborations focused on identifying weaknesses before they could be exploited by hostile actors. On the surface, it was a defensive effort, a way to make systems more secure. But underneath that, there was a deeper implication. If one organization could map vulnerabilities across the world's most important systems, then that organization held a unique kind of power. Not physical power, not political power, but informational power. The ability to see exactly where everything breaks. Inside Washington, that realization didn't go unnoticed, because this changed the equation entirely. Up until this point, the government had leverage. It controlled contracts, access, regulation. But now, Anthropic had something that didn't depend on any of that. It had capability. And in a race driven by technological advancement, capability becomes the deciding factor. The concern wasn't hypothetical. If this technology existed, it wouldn't stay isolated. Other countries were investing heavily in AI. Other organizations were pushing towards similar goals. And if one of them reached this level of capability without the same ethical constraints, the global balance of power could shift in an afternoon. So the question inside the government began to change. It was no longer just about whether Anthropic had followed the rules. It was about whether the United States could afford to stay disconnected from the very shield or sword that they had built. Because if they didn't engage with it, someone else would. That realization led to a shift. Not publicly at first, but internally. Discussions began to move away from enforcement and toward access, from rejection to reconsideration. And eventually, those discussions reached the highest levels. At the center of this next phase was Susie Wiles. Her role placed her at the intersection of policy, strategy, and execution. She wasn't responsible for building technology or deploying it in the field, but she was responsible for ensuring that decisions aligned with broader national priorities. And now, one of those priorities had become clear: understanding what to do about Anthropic. A meeting was scheduled, not publicized, not announced in advance, but significant. Because this time, the tone was different. There was no ultimatum, no deadline, no threat. On one side of the table would be representatives of the White House. On the other would be the same person who had refused the Pentagon's demands, Dario Amodei. The context had changed, but the core issue remained. Who decides how a system like this is used? The company that builds it or the government that wants to deploy it? For decades, that question had a predictable answer. Governments set the rules. Companies operated within them. But artificial intelligence is shifting that balance. Because now, small groups of researchers can create systems with global impact. Systems that influence economies, security, and infrastructure more profoundly than traditional legislation ever could. And once those systems exist, controlling them isn't as simple as issuing directives or enforcing regulations. It requires cooperation, alignment, and sometimes negotiation between equals. That's where things stand now. The same government that labeled Anthropic a risk is now exploring ways to work with it. The same company that refused to comply is now being asked to engage. Neither side has fully changed its position, but both sides have adjusted their approach because the stakes are far too high for either to ignore. What's clear is that the balance is shifting, and the decisions being made now will shape how that balance evolves. This story doesn't end with a clear resolution. The legal battles are still ongoing, the negotiations are still unfolding, and the technology itself continues to advance at a pace that often leaves the law behind. But one thing has already been established. The relationship between governments and AI companies is changing. And in that changing relationship, control is no longer assumed, it's contested. The outcome of that contest will determine not just who leads in artificial intelligence, but how it is used in the world, whether as a tool for protection or a tool for power. And that decision is still being made.